Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. Again, we are primarily doing this on YouTube. We'll do the audio on the podcast feed. If you're watching, you can see me joined by Joey Dwyer. He is our basketball guy turned baseball guy too. And we are going to break down the draft as it pertains to Vanderbilt. The draft, of course, happened earlier in the week. Our podcast, of course, is part of the 440 Sports Network. And special thanks to Southern and Belk, a family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt in an accident, give Taylor or Russell a call at 615-846-6200. See what your rights are and if they can help. All right, Joey. Drafts are eagerly awaited events for Vanderbilt baseball, not just for the guys who we have grown accustomed to covering, but the guys that we may or may not be covering. And there's plenty of both in the signing class. And the draft is an interesting event. Look, nothing's ever settled till that last day. I think it's the 25th, and guys sign. I'm not sure as we do this. This is Thursday night. I've not checked to see if anybody signed today, but you would think for the most part, of guys that we are going to talk about were selected, that they're going to sign, especially the higher they are picked. Let's just run down the draft. And we'll start with the current players, and we'll just go in order. That, of course, would start with Enrique Bradfield Jr., who was picked 17th by the Orioles. Will now be playing in Camden Yards one day. Did not have the best of exits in terms of what he's capable of doing. He was hurt all year. There was talk of sort of changing his swing back to what it was before. But I think if you get Enrique Bradfield back to vintage Enrique Bradfield Jr. doing those kind of things, I think he's going to be fine. I think he's got a chance to be a really good major league outfielder for a long time, especially on the defensive end.
Right. And I think he went to a situation that maybe isn't ideal in terms of playing time or his path, but it's an organization that's developed outfielders. I think I had a stat that 6 of their top 30 prospects are outfielders. They have Austin Hayes, who made the All-Star game this year, homegrown guy who kind of came out of nowhere. Cedric Mullins, also a homegrown guy who came out of nowhere. And then Heston Kjerstad, Colton Cowser just made his debut, Kyle Stowers, all types of outfielders in the system who have given the Orioles a lot. So the development plan seems to be there. And for them, Bradfield seems to be a high floor kind of guy who you know what you're going to get defensively and on the base pass, obviously. And then the offense will probably be a little bit of a work in progress, but I think you know kind of what you're getting into there with him being an SEC guy who's done it at this level and has hit in big moments and has been productive for years as a 3-year guy and left Vanderbilt with all types of accolades. So I'm sure the Orioles are happy with that pick. I don't know if the fan base loved it as much with some of the guys on the board, but Orioles made the safe pick there. And for Enrique Bradfield, what you look at is that development plan.
Next guy off the board, Hunter Owen, goes to the Royals at pick 106, lower than I thought he would go. Of course, the issue with Hunter Owen was just health. He was hurt probably as often as he was healthy the last 2 years, but boy, when he pitched, he was great. I think Hunter Owen, to me, is a guy that can easily be a productive 3-4 starter for a long time if they can keep him healthy. And you sort of have two narratives with the health there, right? Because one was he missed all that time, but when he did pitch, I mean, he threw a complete game this year. He's a big-bodied guy. He was an efficient strike thrower. I think that's a good bet for the Royals where they took him.
Yeah, what stands out to me in terms of Hunter Owen is that size, and then how he did in the pre-draft process. You heard a lot of good things coming out of the combine. He was a guy who stood out, so was able to bounce back from some of the injury issues he had at Vandy. When he was at Vandy, he was really, really good. Like you said, I thought he could have been a guy who could win the second round, maybe the third round, but end up in the fourth to the Royals. And I think that's a guy that Royals fans maybe aren't super excited about now, but should be and probably will be pretty soon. It's a guy who I think maybe will have a little bit of trouble getting stretched out to a full season originally, but man, can he get outs and has really good stuff and a nice frame as well.
Well, there was talk he might slip into the first round too. So I think the range of outcomes there was pretty large. I guess the injuries, I don't know if the money, if he had a number that scared people off, but that was lower than I thought he'd go. You did see him in some mock drafts as a first rounder during the season, although I think that tailed off more towards the end of the year. Okay, next one up. Goodness, was Patrick Riley the next guy off the board for Vandy? I guess
It
he
was.
was.
Mm-hmm.
Round 5, pick 140, higher than I thought he'd go. Riley was considered a 200s, 300s prospect, but it only takes one team, and you've seen Riley mentioned for the last couple of years at various points as a potential first rounder. That was a little hard to buy if you watched him pitch. Not that the talent wasn't there, but he just couldn't throw strikes and be consistent. And he ended up going higher than I saw him in terms of prospect rankings. But again, somebody thinks they can fix that, and if they can, there's a very productive arm in there.
Yeah, it's probably worth taking a flyer on in the 5th round. The only reason I thought that there was a chance he could go this high was I was at most of the midweeks this year, and a lot of those Patrick Riley pitched, especially earlier in the year. And this is the same with Grayson Carter. Carter, I think, had a little bit better outcomes in his starts, but there was always scouts behind the plate at Vanderbilt when Patrick Riley was pitching, and a lot of them were there for Patrick Riley, from what I could tell by them having radar guns and such. Patrick Riley was a guy who teams seemed to be interested in for a long time, even dating back to before I started covering this team. And I think you saw that there. Seems like he's pretty highly regarded in those circles, even if the productivity wasn't there. And I think you'll see that a lot more with high school guys. But Patrick Riley seemed to get that benefit of the doubt just because of that stuff. And that stuff certainly could play if he can reel it in a little bit.
The Marlins do a good job of collecting and developing arms. Did it again in this draft, and we'll get to one of those in a minute. But in terms of current players, they took Nick Maldonado 8th, 233rd overall. That I saw a blurb. I think this was, it might have been on D1 talking about Maldonado could be quick to the majors. I kind of agree because that profile, he's got 2 or 3 pitches. He's a strike thrower. He's got sort of an out pitch with that cutter slider, whatever they call it these days, and is an older guy. I think Nick Maldonado has got a decent shot to wind up pitching in a major league bullpen, and in this case, it looks like it would be the Marlins.
Right. And what I thought with him and Riley being back-to-back guys is not complete opposites, but not super similar in the reasons they were drafted. Maldonado was a guy who was really productive in his career at Vanderbilt. I think he had a 1.45 ERA in his last year. Obviously has some good stuff, but doesn't have the stuff that maybe jumps out to you as a super high ceiling guy like Riley could be. But Maldonado was productive, has good stuff. Maybe not the high ceiling that Riley has, but there's a reason he was drafted, and I think Vanderbilt fans saw that for a lot of his career.
Didn't see Thomas Schultz on a lot of pre-draft lists. Schultz ended up going 9th to the Nationals, of course, who took Dylan Cruz at 2. I would presume this would be a senior money-saving sign, which is usually what these guys are. Don't know what Thomas Schultz is at the next level. I thought he was generally underappreciated at Vanderbilt. When it goes well for them, he's throwing strikes. Maybe there's a little bit more velo upside than we've seen with him. He's a big-bodied kid, but I'll be interested to see how Thomas Schultz does for the Nationals.
Yeah, and I thought Schultz was an interesting guy going into the draft that maybe Vanderbilt can sneak through, and if he didn't sign as an undrafted guy, he could come back for one more year and maybe hold down the back end of that bullpen. That obviously didn't happen. And also Grayson Moore, who we're going to mention next, also getting drafted, will hinder their bullpen a bit. But now with Sawyer Hawks and then some of those freshman arms, Vanderbilt's going to have to replace a lot in that bullpen that Schultz could have given them, and will certainly be an interesting few months as Vanderbilt tries to piece together a bullpen behind their rotation that seems to be one of the best in the league.
RJ Schreck to the Mariners, pick 9, or rather round 9, pick 277. Schreck's a guy that I really loved at Vanderbilt. Loved watching him, loved his game. He's smart. He's got a lot of tools, got patience at the plate, not too much swing and miss, got a little pop. I thought played respectably and right. Of course, he's an older guy. He's a 4th or 5th year senior. In any case, the Mariners are regarded by someone I talked to as kind of a shrewd organization. So to see him picked at a place like that, maybe they know something, that there's a commodity there, because Schreck was not on a lot of prospect lists. I think BA had him 356 overall. Nobody else had him anywhere. But that's one I'm interested to see how it turns out, because just as a ball player watching him day to day, I had an appreciation for what he did.
Yeah, and I think that also lends itself to Vanderbilt's recruiting pitch in the portal a little bit to older guys. They're probably going to have to recruit some older guys with the admission standards and such. And RJ Schreck is an example of what you can do if you transfer to Vanderbilt for a year and step into that everyday role that RJ Schreck did and are productive. Was a guy last year who wanted to go to the draft, but for whatever reason didn't work out. Ended up at Vanderbilt, plays a year there, and finds himself in an MLB organization about a year later. So Tim Porter can use that as a recruiting pitch to transfers, which I'm sure is prevalent at this point in the offseason as well.
Grayson Moore, the last current Commodore taken, round 14, pick 416 to your team, the Cubs. And I don't really know what happened with Grayson Moore, because that was a name that I think, I don't know, a year ago, you saw him maybe as I may be dreaming this, but I thought Grayson Moore was a more highly regarded prospect than where you saw him on lists. He didn't make any of BA, MLB, or ESPN's list. BA went to 500, ESPN went to 300, MLB went to 250. I thought for sure Grayson Moore with the stuff would be regarded as a top 500 guy that he was not in terms of a prospect. The Cubs take him again at 416. I'd heard some talk that he'd be coming back, but I would presume the Cubs made that pick with the number in mind. And I don't know what they did with the top half of the draft, how much money they've got left over. You would know that better than I would. But more in the whole what happened there part that I frankly just don't know enough about was interesting, because if you'd said a year ago that the Grayson Moore gets taken that late, I would have been surprised.
Yeah.
And I say that in a way that I thought he would have been, there would have been more prospect helium with him than there was. Like, and I'll give you, like you saw Jax Wiggins taken to the top 100 picks, missed all year with blown out elbow. And that's a guy that had big flaws, couldn't throw strikes. Point is, if you got the talent, a team is going to take a chance on you and look at the good rather than the bad. That's one I don't really get.
Right, and he was hurt, obviously, like you mentioned, kind of comparing him to Jackson Wiggins a little bit, but he was really good when he got back too. So I don't know what really was there, but I remember that outing against Louisville, I think, was really solid, and then from there, didn't look back a whole lot. And I thought that was another guy who maybe could have been a nice established bullpen arm for them. Did I expect that? Not really, but losing him and Schultz obviously throws a mix in their bullpen. But for more specifically, I think the Cubs are a fine organization for pitchers to go to. They have that pitch lab and a lot of pitching gurus in that organization. So Grayson Moore is a guy who seems to be going into a fine spot with a lot of pitching depth, but not a firm kind of foundation in the big leagues yet. So there's room for Grayson Moore to find a role for himself, and the Cubs have done really well teaching guys pitches and using that pitch lab to develop guys thus far. There's guys like Justin Steele in the majors who have gone through that with the new front office, and Grayson Moore could be a byproduct of that as well.
Okay, let's talk about the guys that went out of high school. There's 4 of them, and Max Clark was a Vanderbilt commit. I mean, if you're placing your hopes on Max Clark making it to campus, those were misplaced hopes, which is why we didn't spend much time talking about him. George Lombard Jr. to the Yankees, 26 overall. I thought maybe there was a lot of talk that he'd go to the Braves, who took Hurston Waldrop at 24. I'm guessing they didn't think he'd be available at that point. The Braves have a habit of taking local high school guys and did not do it in that case. Thomas White to the Marlins at 35. I'd heard some talk maybe a month ago that they had a decent shot there, maybe better than perceived. What little I heard on that recently, the enthusiasm for getting him to campus had waned a little bit. I'm guessing he had a number out there and knew a team that was going to meet it. That ended up being the Marlins in this case. So there was that. And then you had the last one, which would be Alex Clemmie. Same thing. I started to hear late that maybe they had a better chance to get Clemmie than they did White, but that wasn't meant to be either. So I would say that only losing 4 in this case, I sort of said before the draft, put that number at 4.5. If you, in terms of guys that you're going to lose, if you get under it, you can be pretty happy. If you go over it, maybe by one, then okay, you're a little bummed, but it's not entirely expected. Six or more, that would have really been a disaster. So I think they settled at a pretty decent place, all things considered.
For sure, that was what I was going to say. The first day, obviously, didn't go super well for Vanderbilt. Lost four guys, thinking the worst. But as the second day kind of rolled in, Braden Holcomb announced that he'll be going to campus. And then the third day, when no commits are selected, things certainly turned for the better. And I think Vanderbilt made out about as well as you could hope it for. They get a guy who could potentially be a Friday or Saturday night guy at some point, as well as a bat who could come in and give you some things early, a catcher who could come in and push Alan Espinal and Jack Bolger for playing time as a freshman. Two guys who also went undrafted, yet to be seen if they'll sign anywhere. But feel like Vanderbilt has a nice class coming in, and certainly could have been a lot worse after the panic on day one from the fan base.
Yeah, I think McIlvain was one I was very concerned about. There's been talk he's a two-pitch guy. I think in that case, you're better off going to college, especially if it's in your backyard like he did. He's got experience with his brother playing there. He will know all the all the shortcuts and things to tell him about playing for Tim Corbin, I would presume. Cozile, getting Cam Cozile through the draft was another one I think that people were concerned about. So I think to me, getting those two guys through was probably the biggest victory. There were some others that we'll get into too, but those were the two that I was really watching the most, and those ended up working out just fine.
Yeah, Holcomb's a guy I'm really high on as well. I think that bat plays in the SEC. Maybe immediately there is some talk of him maybe having some swing and miss issues, but the power is there. It seems like a bat that will translate early on. He's got a nice frame, could fill out even a little bit more and become a guy who is better than a lot of the guys that got drafted in this draft for Vanderbilt at some point. And then McIlvain, a guy who I think is working on what a changeup is his third pitch. That hasn't really got a feel for it from what I can tell and what I've heard, but certainly seems like Vanderbilt made out well. And there's always going to be flaws with some freshmen, but those two I think are guys who can come in and maybe give them some things early on. Barzy I think is also a guy to watch at catcher, a position that Vanderbilt certainly has some question marks at. Maybe addresses in the portal, maybe doesn't, maybe has a competition with what they have on campus.
I'm looking at what everybody did in the SEC, and I'm looking at BAMLB and ESPN. I'm not looking at Perfect Game, which ranks people in its rankings as what kind of college players they'll be. And sometimes there's a disconnect. Usually it's a pretty good match, but Holcomb would be one where I think he was considered a better college prospect than a major league prospect. I think he was ranked 32 on Perfect Game, not quite as high in terms of the draft rankings. So in other words, the thought is he's a better college player than a pro prospect at this point. So he got through. He was a little lower down the prospect list, but I'm looking. You had Florida got Liam Peterson. He was probably the highest regarded guy according to the draft rankings that made it to campus. He was a consensus top 100 guy. Dylan Cupp, Mississippi State shortstop. He was ranked a little higher than McIlvain and Cozile. Then you had Caden Sorrell, outfielder, A&M. Adam Hatchman, a lefty for Arkansas. Zane Adams, lefty for Alabama. So those five guys were ranked higher than anybody Vandy got through the draft in terms of being draft prospects. Then you get to McIlvain and Cozile, who were basically both consensus top 150 dudes in the draft. So those are pretty good wins in this day and age.
For sure, and to be completely honest with you, I didn't think they were going to get McIlvain through the draft. You had more insight than
I didn't either.
Yeah, but I didn't think they were going to get him through the draft, and they did. So that's a win there. And then having a guy who can play shortstop and hit for average also really nice as well. So I think Vanderbilt made out well in this class. And it's interesting that you brought up the college versus pro rankings because I was just thinking about how that relates to basketball and probably a lot different considering guys who average like 8 points a game are drafted in the top 15, 20 in the NBA.
Yeah, and the two other guys they had that didn't get picked that were ranked in some rankings, RJ Hamilton, who is, goodness, he was ranked top 400. consensus. Well, at least he was 382 by Baseball America, to be exact. Shortstop. And then before that, Colin Barcy, I guess is how you pronounce it, Barczi, catcher, who they also got through, who was top 200-ish, 163 by Baseball America. So another guy that, in terms of the experts and what they thought, they were at risk to lose him potentially.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Hamilton because I was going to do the same, but I think that's also a guy worth mentioning that they get through, and they also get a lot of nice arms through. And Austin Fort, who we had talked about last podcast, having a nice summer ball, gets through as well. He wasn't on boards really, but seems to be a guy who a lot of people are really high on. And then obviously having all those arms can help them with their bullpen right away. And signing a class this big in terms of pitchers can only be a good thing, it feels like.
Yeah. Okay. So what's left? You've got the first baseman out of Miami-Dade County, whose name escapes me at the moment. Help me out here. You know who I'm talking about.
Is it Austin?
Yeah, you do.
Not Austin Ford. Yeah.
Yes, that's the one. He wasn't
Austin
considered
Ford.
much of a draft prospect, but he's a guy that people have pointed to being able to help him. So I think they're going to end up probably with a top 5 class when all is said and done. And look, if by some miracle one of those 4 guys drafted doesn't sign, and I think White is already signed, is that right, or is about to?
I'm not sure.
So I wouldn't be getting my hopes up there. Would be the point, but so I think they're in a pretty good spot. They only had 3 kids hit the portal. Oh, by the way, Jack Bolger didn't get picked, which is another one I didn't know what to do with, and I guess the pros didn't either. I know that's there's a lot of Jack Bolger talk on the board this year. I won't get into all that. All I can tell you is he's a kid who's been a good citizen since he's been at Vanderbilt. I don't know. Maybe there's a little bit better version of Jack Bolger than we saw the last couple of years, because 3 years ago he was one that when they got him through the draft, I think everybody was delighted with that one. It just has never worked out the way that I think most people thought it would. But there's, who knows? Maybe Bolger comes back, has a great senior year. But now we turn sort of towards the, just watching in case you get a surprise and I don't know, somebody comes back for a 4th or 5th year. Again, I wouldn't expect it. I don't have any info there one way or the other, but just these are guys that played a long time at Vandy. And I think there's not going to be a lot of getting better for most of these guys. I think they're already pretty much close to what they're going to be at this point. So Grayson Moore would be the one, right? Mm-hmm. Grayson Moore, I could see him coming back, having a big year, blowing up, but then you lose your leverage too. So who knows? So you've got Bolger coming back. They've added 2 through the portal. And I guess the thing we're watching right now is Braden Montgomery, the All-American 2-way guy at Stanford, who didn't pitch very well, but was an All-American level outfielder, would be a power bat that they need. Of course, they added a pretty good power middle infielder from Stanford through the portal a couple of weeks ago. But that's the storyline kind of to watch now, is how big a player is Vanderbilt with Braden Montgomery.
Right. And I think Holcomb gives them some nice power. Jaden Davis gives them some power. But still, I think there's a little bit to be desired in that lineup when losing Streck, losing Nolan. Even Bradfield, to an extent, who lifted the ball a little bit more in his final season. I don't know that he was ever a great power hitter. I think he only had 6 homers his senior year. But you're still losing a lot of power, lefty power in particular. And I think getting guys from the portal will certainly help with that. And I think they need more veterans in that lineup as well. There's a lot of maybe not young guys on this roster, but not guys who are overly experienced RJ Schreck types. Feels like they're still kind of looking for that, especially in the lineup.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts, Joey? I guess we'll do another podcast, either me and you or Chip Frederick and I, once everything is settled with guys signing or not signing. You'll have some portal activity probably between now and then where Montgomery will either land at another school or maybe go back to Stanford. That's been mentioned as a possibility. You may have another guy in the portal that ends up at Vandy. They are very clandestine in how they do their portal work, and you don't always know, or a lot of people don't always know till they've landed somebody. I don't know of anything on the back burner at this point, but just going to throw that out there. I don't ever presume I know everything they're doing or not doing in the portal. But I think that'll be the thing to watch is, are there any surprises between now and the 25th, which I think is the date again. And where does Montgomery land? Because landing him would be I'm going to guess they're going to be a preseason top 5 team anyway, but I think that would probably do it. No, by the way, if you didn't follow it, Chase Burns is now headed to Wake Forest, and I'm guessing the issue there was it's been rumored there's been a credit transfer issue with his major, but I cannot confirm that as we're sitting here doing this on a Thursday night.
Right. It felt like there was definitely some traction to Vandy, and some things we had heard had indicated that it seemed like Vandy was a destination that he was very interested in, but didn't work out. Like you said, I think just looking for big surprises here, and I think this will be a good team. Braden Montgomery takes us to a next level team, and I think that's what you take away from that recruitment. If Vanderbilt gets him, we'll have to do a rapid reaction if that's a commitment they get, and we don't often do those for baseball commits, so that would be a huge commitment. But closing thoughts, I think Vanderbilt made out pretty well in the draft, all things considered. If you had the fair expectation that they were going to lose those 4 guys, I think you're really happy seeing what they got out of the high school class. Maybe the current Vanderbilt players didn't go quite as well, but they still have some guys back who can give them some things. And closing thought, just read our work at vandysports.com. Talked to Jason Rivera-Torres this week. Put out 2 stories on that, one basketball, one a feature. Probably have another feature in the next couple of weeks, and then we've got a lot of baseball content, recapping the draft and recapping some commitments. Talked with a few of their transfer portal commits recently, so go on vandysports.com, quick plug, and I appreciate all you guys listening.
Well, quick plug too for sponsorships. We've got a couple. I will unveil those at a future date soon, but they have enabled us to be able to retain you for next year. So we appreciate those. We'll be making official announcements. Got one more hire in the transfer portals. No, that's not a good way to put it. But one more target I'll put out there for some help that we're working on, and sponsorships will help secure that if we can do it. So if you're interested in sponsoring our podcast to help underwrite our coverage and take it to a different level, you can email me at chrislee70@gmail.com. But it has made a difference in us being able to retain you for next year. So very excited about that. We got some plans and some stuff we want to do. But unfortunately, bills are due in dollars and not hugs. And so we have to make allowances accordingly. So if you're interested in partnering with us with doing some really good things, again, email me at that address, and we'll talk about some needs and some aims and some ways that you will see some more coverage and some things we would like to do that we haven't done before. So please contact me if you're interested in those things, because they are pretty crucial to us being able to do this. Okay, Joey, I think you wrapped the draft up as well as I can. So with that, we'll go. May or may not have a show next week. It just depends. And then, goodness, 2 weeks from now, we'll be at fall camp. I'll be at fall camp. You'll be back in Atlanta. But you'll be joining us for some football coverage this season. Look forward to that. In any case, thank you again to our sponsors at Southern and Belk, and to the 440 Network for having us as part of what they do, or having us as part of what they do. Okay, you know it's time to end the podcast when I'm running out of steam and like I am here. So we're going to do that. I'm Chris Lee of Vandy Sports. He's Joey Dwyer. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.